The spirit of ecstasy ornament shattered against hot asphalt with the sound of breaking dreams. Chrome fragments scattering like fallen stars across the concrete. Derrick Miles felt his wrists burn as plastic zip ties bit into his skin. The luxury car's dashboard cameras, still streaming live to servers, he prayed were recording every second of this nightmare. Steam rose from the pavement where his knees had struck. The New York summer heat, making everything shimmer like a mirage. Except this brutality was devastatingly real. "You think you can just cruise around in stolen property?" Officer Martinez sneered, his badge gleaming against the backdrop of Riverside Gardens' manicured lawns. The HOA enforcement vehicle's sirens had gone silent, but the red and blue lights continued their manic dance across the faces of gathering residents. "This ain't your neighborhood, boy." The word hung in the air like poison gas. Derrick closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of injustice pressing down on his chest. He'd been here before, in different forms, different circumstances, but always the same underlying current of assumption and hatred. The only difference was that this time, he had resources. This time, he had connections. This time, they'd picked the wrong target. 3 hours earlier, Derrick had been standing in the gleaming showroom of Manhattan Premium Imports, admiring the pristine Rolls-Royce Phantom that would soon be the centerpiece of his annual charity auction. The dealer, Robert Chen, had handed him the keys with a warm smile and the registration papers that clearly bore Derrick's name as the authorized test driver for the Miles Foundation. "Take her for a proper drive," Robert had insisted, his hands gesturing toward the magnificent machine. "She needs to stretch her legs before the auction next week. Besides, you've earned this moment of luxury after everything you've done for the city's youth programs." Derrick had laughed, remembering how far he'd come from the streets of Brooklyn, where he'd grown up alongside Lydia Chen, Robert's cousin, who now served as NYPD Commissioner. They'd shared dreams on those same streets, promising each other they'd make something of themselves, that they'd change the world for kids who looked like them and came from where they came from. Now, here he was, a successful philanthropist whose foundation had kept thousands of at-risk youth off the streets. And there she was, the city's top cop, both of them living proof that dreams could survive the harshest realities. The Phantom had purred like a contented lion as he'd navigated through Manhattan traffic, heading toward Riverside Gardens, where he maintained a small office for his foundation's community outreach programs. The car's interior smelled of hand-stitched leather and possibility, its dashboard displaying more technology than most people's homes. He'd been thinking about the 50 kids who would benefit from the auction proceeds when his phone had buzzed with a text from his program coordinator. "Emergency at the center. Marcus got arrested again. Need you here ASAP." Marcus Williams, 16 years old and carrying the weight of the world on his narrow shoulders. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, and his father had been gone since Marcus was 7. The kid had potential that shone like polished gold, but the streets kept calling him back like a siren song. Derrick had seen it happen too many times before, watched brilliant young minds get swallowed by circumstances beyond their control. He'd pressed the accelerator, feeling the Phantom's engine respond with smooth authority. The drive to Riverside Gardens usually took 40 minutes in traffic, but he'd made it in 25. The car's adaptive cruise control and traffic recognition systems making the journey feel effortless. He'd parked in his usual spot outside the community center, a modest building sandwiched between a laundromat and a corner store that had seen better decades. That's when the HOA enforcement officers had appeared like vultures circling wounded prey. Officer Martinez had approached first, his hand already resting on his radio, his eyes taking in every detail of the Phantom with the practiced gaze of a predator sizing up potential prey. His partner, Officer Johnson, had circled around to the passenger side, creating what Derrick recognized as a classic intimidation formation designed to make the target feel surrounded and helpless. "License and registration," Martinez had demanded, his tone already carrying the assumption of guilt. Derrick had complied immediately, reaching into his jacket pocket with deliberate, visible movements. He'd learned long ago that survival in these situations depended on eliminating any excuse for escalation. The registration papers were pristine, clearly showing his name, the dealer's authorization, and the vehicle identification numbers that matched the Phantom perfectly. Martinez had barely glanced at the documents before tossing them back through the window. "This is fake. Step out of the vehicle." The words had hit Derrick like a physical blow, not because they were unexpected, but because they confirmed his worst fears about the world his foundation kids had to navigate every day. Here he was, a respected member of the community, with legitimate paperwork, driving a car he had every right to possess, and still being treated like a criminal simply because his skin didn't match the assumptions these officers carried in their heads. "Officer, I understand your concern, but these documents are completely legitimate," Derrick had said, keeping his voice level and professional. "You can verify this with the dealer. His number is right there on the registration." Johnson had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Sure it is. Just like that Rolex on your wrist is real. Right, you kids today think you can fake anything." The watch in question was indeed a Rolex, a gift from the city council when his foundation had reached the milestone of keeping its 1,000th kid off the streets and in school. It bore an engraving on the back, "To Derrick Miles, guardian angel of New York's youth." But these officers weren't interested in engravings or truth, or the careful balance of justice they'd sworn to uphold. What happened next unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a natural disaster. Derrick had stepped out of the car with his hands visible, moving slowly and speaking calmly. He'd explained about the charity auction, about his foundation, about his authorized test drive. He'd even offered to call Robert Chen on the spot to verify everything. None of it mattered. Martinez had grabbed his arm with unnecessary force, spinning him around and slamming him against the Phantom's hood. The spirit of ecstasy ornament had dug into Derrick's ribs as Johnson searched his pockets, tossing his wallet, phone, and keys onto the ground like worthless debris. "Resisting arrest," Martinez had announced to his body camera, though Derrick hadn't moved a muscle beyond compliance. "Attempting to flee," Johnson had added, though Derrick's feet had remained planted exactly where they'd placed him. The zip ties had followed, plastic teeth biting into his wrists like mechanical piranhas. Then came the push that sent him to his knees. The moment when the spirit of ecstasy broke free from the Phantom's hood and shattered against the asphalt like a fallen angel. Now, kneeling in the spreading puddle of his own dignity, Derrick felt something deeper than anger building in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd carried since childhood, watching his neighbors get swallowed by a system designed to consume them. But unlike those childhood moments when he'd been powerless, this time he had tools. This time he had connections. This time the system would learn that some people fight back. His smartwatch, the latest model with emergency features he'd never hoped to use, had been recording everything since the moment Martinez had approached his car. More importantly, it was linked to his emergency contacts, including one particular number that could change everything. Commissioner Lydia Chen was in her office reviewing budget proposals when her personal emergency line buzzed with a priority alert. The caller ID showed Derrick's name, but instead of his voice, she heard the automated emergency protocol message from his smartwatch. "This is an automated emergency broadcast from Derrick Miles. GPS coordinates and live audio-video feed are attached. Please respond immediately." Lydia's blood turned to ice water as she activated the live feed. On her screen, she watched her childhood friend, her brother, in all but blood. Kneeling on hot asphalt, while two officers who were about to discover they'd made the biggest mistake of their careers stood over him like conquerors. But that wasn't the only technology working in Derrick's favor. The Phantom's advanced security system included 360-degree cameras that automatically uploaded to cloud storage when the vehicle detected potential theft or vandalism. What Derrick hadn't mentioned to anyone, including the officers currently destroying his dignity, was that he'd recently invested in a rather unique advertising venture. The Miles Foundation had purchased rotating billboard time in Times Square, using it to showcase success stories from their youth programs. The system was designed to activate automatically when certain conditions were met, displaying live feeds from his foundation's security cameras during emergencies. The Phantom's cameras had classified the current situation as a theft in progress. The system had automatically uploaded the live feed to Derrick's billboard slot, which meant that thousands of tourists and New Yorkers were now watching two HOA officers destroy a Rolls-Royce and brutalize its legitimate driver on the electronic billboards that towered over the crossroads of the world. Martinez was busy taking selfies with the impounded Phantom, his social media posts already going live with captions like, "Caught another luxury gang member trying to play rich. Not in our neighborhood." He was too intoxicated by his perceived victory to notice the growing crowd of residents who had emerged from their homes and businesses, their phones pointed at the scene like accusing fingers. Johnson had opened the Phantom's trunk and was tossing out Derrick's foundation materials, scattering reports about after-school programs and college scholarship applications like confetti. "Look at all this fake paperwork," he called out to Martinez. This guy really went all out with his cover story. The irony was devastating. Every document Johnson was destroying represented another life saved, another kid pulled back from the brink, another family given hope. The quarterly report he'd just trampled showed that the Miles Foundation had a 93% success rate in keeping participants off the streets and in school. The scholarship applications bore the names and dreams of teenagers who saw Derrick as their ticket to a better life. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the corner store and had watched Derrick visit the community center every week for 3 years, pushed through the growing crowd with the determination of a woman who'd seen enough injustice for several lifetimes. "You leave that boy alone," she shouted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 8 children and buried a husband who died fighting for civil rights. "That's Mr. Miles from the Foundation. He helps our kids." Martinez turned toward her with the practiced sneer of someone who enjoyed having power over others. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. This is police business." "This is our neighborhood business," Mrs. Patterson shot back, her phone now recording everything. "And that man has done more good for this community than you ever will." More voices joined hers. Mr. Rodriguez from the laundromat, teen activists from the community center, parents whose children had benefited from Derrick's programs, even some of the kids themselves, arriving from school to find their mentor and role model being treated like a common criminal. But Martinez and Johnson were beyond reason now, drunk on the power they thought they wielded. They'd created their own version of reality where they were heroes bringing down a sophisticated car thief, and no amount of evidence or community testimony was going to penetrate their delusions. That's when the first NYPD cruiser arrived. Commissioner Chen had activated every emergency protocol at her disposal the moment she'd seen the live feed. She'd dispatched units from 3 different precincts, called in the Internal Affairs Division, and personally contacted the mayor's office. She was en route herself, but she'd made sure her officers would arrive first to protect Derrick and preserve the scene. Lieutenant Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who'd worked with Chen since her early days on the force, stepped out of the lead cruiser with the careful movements of someone who understood they were walking into a situation that could define careers and destroy lives. behind him. Detective Sarah Kim emerged from the passenger seat, her notebook already out, her eyes taking in every detail of the scene with the clinical precision of someone who specialized in police misconduct cases. "Officers," Rodriguez called out, his voice carrying enough authority to stop Martinez and Johnson in their tracks. "I'm going to need you to step away from the suspect and explain what we have here." Martinez straightened up, clearly relieved to see what he assumed was backup arriving. "Got ourselves a car thief, Lieutenant. Stole this Rolls-Royce and had a whole folder of fake documents to back up his story. Real professional operation." Rodriguez looked at the registration papers scattered on the ground, then at Derrick, who was still kneeling with his hands zip-tied behind his back. Something in the lieutenant's expression shifted as he processed the scene, his experienced eyes noting details that Martinez and Johnson had been too blinded by their assumptions to see. "Has anyone verified the registration?" Rodriguez asked. "It's obviously fake." Johnson jumped in. "Look at this guy. You think he can afford a car like this?" The racism in that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Rodriguez felt his jaw tighten as he looked around at the crowd of community members, all of whom were now recording everything on their phones. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity anymore. This was a public relations disaster in the making, a powder keg that could explode across social media and cable news before the sunset. Detective Kim had been quietly collecting the scattered papers, her trained eye immediately recognizing the authentic formatting, official seals, and security features that marked legitimate documents. She looked up at Rodriguez and shook her head slightly, a gesture that confirmed what he was already beginning to suspect. "The registration appears legitimate," Kim announced, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "I'm seeing dealer authorization, proper VIN matching, and current insurance documentation." Martinez's face went red. "That's impossible. Those are forgeries." "Then we'll verify them properly," Rodriguez said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He walked over to Derrick, noting the expensive watch, the quality clothing, the calm dignity that marked someone accustomed to being treated with respect. "Sir, I'm Lieutenant Rodriguez with the NYPD. Can you tell me your name?" "Derrick Miles," came the steady reply. "I run the Miles Foundation for At-Risk Youth. I was test driving this vehicle for our upcoming charity auction when these officers approached me." Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. He knew that name. Every NYPD officer above the rank of sergeant knew that name. Derrick Miles was the commissioner's personal friend, a man who'd received commendations from the mayor, whose foundation had partnerships with half the city's law enforcement agencies. If these HOA officers had just brutalized one of the city's most respected community leaders. "Kim," Rodriguez said quietly, "call it in. Get me a verification on the registration and run a background check on Mr. Miles." Detective Kim was already on her radio, but before she could complete the call, another sound cut through the afternoon air. The distinctive rumble of high-performance engines approaching at speed. Commissioner Chen wasn't taking any chances with this situation. She was arriving with a full escort, and she was arriving now. The convoy that rounded the corner looked like something from a movie. 3 NYPD cruisers led the way, followed by Chen's unmarked sedan, with 2 more patrol cars bringing up the rear. Emergency lights painted the entire street in flashing colors as the vehicles arranged themselves in a protective formation around the scene. Commissioner Lydia Chen stepped out of her sedan with the controlled fury of someone who'd just watched her lifelong friend being degraded and brutalized by officers who were supposed to serve and protect. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who commanded 38,000 police officers and had earned their respect through 2 decades of exemplary service. Her eyes found Derrick immediately, still kneeling on the hot asphalt with zip ties cutting into his wrists. The sight hit her like a physical blow, carrying her back to their childhood when they'd promised each other they'd change the world, make it better for kids who looked like them. Now, here was that same little boy from Brooklyn, grown into a man who'd kept his promise, being treated like a criminal by officers who didn't deserve to wear the badge. Cut him loose. Now. Her voice carried across the street with the force of absolute authority. Martinez looked confused, clearly not recognizing the woman who'd just given him an order. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back behind the police line." Chen's badge came out like a weapon, the shield gleaming in the afternoon sun. "I am Commissioner Lydia Chen, NYPD. That man is Derrick Miles, one of this city's most respected community leaders and a personal friend. You will release him immediately, or I will have you arrested for kidnapping, assault, and violation of civil rights." The color drained from Martinez's face, like water running out of a broken pipe. Johnson actually took a step backward, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon before he realized how catastrophically stupid that would be. Lieutenant Rodriguez moved quickly to cut the zip ties, helping Derrick to his feet with the careful respect of someone handling delicate evidence. "Sir, I apologize on behalf of the NYPD. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Derrick flexed his fingers, feeling circulation returning to his hands. His wrists bore angry red marks where the plastic had bitten into his skin, and his knees were scraped from being forced to the ground. But he was intact. More importantly, he was free. And he was surrounded by officers who understood exactly what had just happened and why it could never be allowed to happen again. "I'm fine, Lieutenant," Derrick said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "But we need to talk about why this happened and how we're going to make sure it never happens again." Chen approached her childhood friend with tears in her eyes that she refused to let fall. "Not here. Not in front of the crowd and the cameras and the officers who looked to her for strength." But Derrick could see them anyway, could see the pain and fury and determination that had carried her through every challenge they'd faced together. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, using the nickname she'd called him since they were 8 years old. "This should never have happened." "It's not your fault, Lydia," he replied, his hand squeezing her shoulder. "But it's our responsibility to make sure it means something." Around them, the scene was transforming from confrontation to investigation. Detective Kim was documenting everything, photographing the damaged Spirit of Ecstasy ornament, the scattered foundation documents, the marks on Derrick's wrists. Other officers were interviewing witnesses, collecting phone footage from community members, building the case that would ensure Martinez and Johnson faced consequences for their actions. But the most damning evidence was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. The live feed from the Times Square billboard had been captured and shared by hundreds of social media users. The hashtag #JockHerJusticeForDerrick was trending nationally within an hour. Cable news networks were interrupting regular programming to show footage of the incident. The video of Martinez taking selfies with the impounded Phantom while Derrick knelt on the hot asphalt was being viewed millions of times, each viewing adding to the pressure for accountability and change. Martinez and Johnson found themselves in handcuffs, their roles reversed with stunning swiftness. The charges read like a catalog of everything wrong with policing in America: assault under color of authority, grand theft auto, destruction of property, violation of civil rights, and filing false police reports. Their faces were now the ones being broadcast across the nation, their names associated forever with the kind of abuse of power that destroyed communities and shattered trust. As they were loaded into the back of police cruisers, Martinez made one last desperate attempt to justify his actions. "You people don't understand. He called out to the cameras and crowd. He looked suspicious. The car was too expensive. We were just doing our jobs. The silence that followed his words was deafening. Even his fellow officers looked away, unwilling to be associated with the toxic assumptions that had driven his actions. In trying to defend himself, Martinez had only confirmed what everyone already knew, that he'd targeted Derrick, not because of any evidence of wrongdoing, but because a black man in a luxury car didn't fit his narrow worldview of who deserved respect and dignity. Mrs. Patterson pushed through the crowd once more, this time approaching Commissioner Chen with the dignity of a woman who'd watched her community suffer too much injustice for too long. Commissioner, we appreciate you coming out here personally, but we need to know this isn't just about Mr. Miles being your friend. This is about all of us, about how our children get treated when you're not around to protect them. Chen nodded, understanding the deeper implications of what had happened. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Patterson. This incident is going to be the catalyst for changes that should have happened years ago. We're going to review every case these officers have handled, investigate every complaint, and implement new training protocols that make it impossible for this kind of targeted harassment to continue. She turned to address the entire crowd, her voice carrying the weight of both personal commitment and official authority. What happened here today was not just an attack on Derrick Miles. It was an attack on every member of this community, every child whose future depends on being treated with dignity and respect. We will not let it stand. The Phantom sat in the middle of the street like a wounded beast, its hood damaged where Derrick had been slammed against it, its trunk still open where officers had ransacked through his foundation materials. The spirit of ecstasy lay in pieces on the asphalt, a powerful symbol of how quickly dignity could be shattered by those who wielded authority without wisdom. But symbols could be repaired, and dignity could be restored. Robert Chen arrived as the police cruisers carrying Martinez and Johnson disappeared around the corner. His face was pale with shock as he surveyed the damage to the Phantom. But his primary concern was for Derrick, whom he embraced like a brother. I heard what happened on the news, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Are you hurt? Do you need anything? Derrick looked around at the community that had rallied to support him, at the police officers who were now working to ensure justice, at his childhood friend who'd used her position to protect him when he'd needed it most. I need this to mean something. Robert, I need this moment to be the beginning of something better. It will be, Commissioner Chen said firmly. The HOA that employs those officers is going to face federal civil rights charges. Their insurance company is already talking about settlements, and every penny of that money is going straight to community programs and police reform initiatives. The investigation that followed would reveal the full extent of Martinez and Johnson's misconduct. Their body cameras had been deliberately disabled during previous encounters. Their social media accounts contained dozens of posts celebrating arrests of Black and Latino residents, often with derogatory comments about their appearance, their cars, their right to exist in certain neighborhoods. Internal Affairs discovered a pattern of targeting that went back years, a systematic campaign of harassment that had destroyed lives and shattered trust. The federal charges came down like a hammer of justice. Grand theft auto, assault under color of authority, conspiracy to violate civil rights, filing false police reports, destruction of evidence. Each count carried the weight of federal prison time, the kind of consequences that would serve as a warning to every officer who thought they could abuse their authority without facing accountability. But the real change came in the aftermath, in the reforms and initiatives that transformed how law enforcement interacted with the communities they served. The Miles Foundation received a settlement that allowed them to expand their programs to serve thousands more at-risk youth. They established the Dignity Project, a comprehensive initiative that provided legal support for victims of police misconduct while also working with law enforcement agencies to implement better training and accountability measures. The Phantom was restored to its original glory, the spirit of ecstasy ornament replaced and polished to perfection. When it sold at the charity auction 3 months later, it brought in twice its estimated value, with the buyer specifically citing its role in exposing injustice and catalyzing change. The additional funds allowed the foundation to purchase a permanent headquarters in Riverside Gardens, right across from the community center where Derrick had been brutalized. Commissioner Chen implemented mandatory bias training for all NYPD officers, established a civilian oversight committee with real power to investigate misconduct, and created a scholarship program that recruited officers from the communities they served. The changes weren't perfect, and they didn't solve every problem, but they represented a genuine commitment to reform and accountability. Marcus Williams, the 16-year-old whose emergency had brought Derrick to Riverside Gardens that day, graduated from high school with honors and received a full scholarship to Columbia University. At his graduation ceremony, he dedicated his achievement to Mr. Miles, who showed me that dignity is something nobody can take away from you, even when they try. The community center where Derrick had been targeted became a symbol of resilience and hope. A mural on its side wall depicted the spirit of ecstasy rising from broken pieces, her wings spread wide in triumph. Underneath, in bold letters, were the words that had become the motto of the Dignity Project: "Justice delayed is not justice denied when good people refuse to stay silent." Mrs. Patterson's corner store became an unofficial museum of the incident, with newspaper clippings and photos documenting the arrest of Martinez and Johnson, the federal charges, the community response, and the changes that followed. Tourists sometimes stopped by to hear her tell the story of the day when power met justice and justice won. On the first anniversary of the incident, Derrick returned to the same parking spot outside the community center. This time, he drove his own car, a modest sedan that reflected his practical nature. But parked beside it was the restored Phantom, gleaming in the afternoon sun, its spirit of ecstasy ornament catching the light like a beacon of hope. A crowd gathered as word spread that he was back, the same faces who had defended him a year ago, plus new ones, children who had joined his programs, parents whose lives had been changed by the reforms his suffering had made possible. Commissioner Chen was there, as were Lieutenant Rodriguez and Detective Kim, who had become champions of police reform within the department. Derrick stood before them, his voice carrying the same strength that had sustained him through the darkest moments of that summer day. A year ago, I was forced to my knees on this very spot. They thought they were showing me my place, but instead, they showed the world their true nature. They thought they were breaking my spirit, but instead, they revealed the unbreakable spirit of this community. He gestured toward the mural on the community center wall, toward the children whose faces glowed with possibility, toward the officers who now served with dignity and respect. We turned that moment of injustice into a movement for change. We transformed that pain into power. We proved that when good people stand together, no force can break us. The crowd applauded, but their response was more than noise. It was the sound of a community that had found its voice, a neighborhood that had reclaimed its dignity, a group of people who had learned that justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you create. As the sun set over Riverside Gardens, casting long shadows across the street where everything had changed, Derrick reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The broken spirit of ecstasy had been restored, but more importantly, the broken trust between police and community was slowly being repaired. The scattered documents of hope had been gathered and transformed into expanded programs that reached more children than ever before. Martinez and Johnson were serving federal prison sentences, their badges stripped, their pensions forfeited, their names forever associated with the kind of behavior that had no place in law enforcement. Their downfall served as a warning to others who might be tempted to abuse their authority. A reminder that accountability wasn't just a word, it was a promise. The HOA that had employed them faced federal oversight and was forced to implement comprehensive reforms. Their settlement with Derrick had funded dozens of community programs and police accountability initiatives. The organization that had once terrorized residents now worked to serve them. Their enforcement officers replaced with community liaisons who understood that respect was earned, not imposed. But perhaps the most important change was in the hearts and minds of the people who had witnessed injustice and refused to accept it. They had learned that their voices mattered, that their cameras were weapons against oppression, that their solidarity was stronger than any attempt to divide them. The children who had watched Derrick being brutalized learned that dignity was not something others could take away, but something they had to protect and defend. They saw that authority without accountability was tyranny, but that good people working together could create systems of justice that served everyone fairly. The officers who had responded properly to the scene learned that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult, was the essence of true law enforcement. They became models for their colleagues, proving that police work could be both effective and respectful, both strong and just. As night fell over the transformed community, Derrick made one final stop at Mrs. Patterson's corner store. The elderly woman who had been the first to stand up for him was closing for the evening, but she smiled when she saw him approach. "Mr. Miles," she said warmly, "how are you feeling on this anniversary?" Derrick looked around at the peaceful street, at the community center where his foundation continued to change lives, at the mural that reminded everyone that broken things could be made beautiful again. "I'm feeling hopeful, Mrs. Patterson. A year ago, I thought I was just test driving a car, but I was actually test driving our democracy, our commitment to justice, our willingness to stand up for what's right." He paused, his eyes reflecting the streetlights that now illuminated a safer, more just neighborhood. "And you know what? We passed the test." Mrs. Patterson nodded, her eyes bright with tears of joy rather than sorrow. "We sure did. Son, we sure did." The Phantom sat silent in the parking lot, its cameras no longer recording evidence of injustice, but standing ready to document the ongoing work of building a better world. The Spirit of Ecstasy ornament gleamed in the moonlight, no longer broken, but stronger for having been rebuilt. A fitting symbol for a community that had faced its worst nightmare and emerged more united than ever before. In the end, Martinez and Johnson had been right about one thing: Derrick Miles didn't belong in their version of the world. He belonged in something better, something more just, something more hopeful, and through his pain and perseverance, through the support of his community and the courage of good officers who chose justice over silence, he had helped create exactly that kind of world. The broken pieces of the Spirit of Ecstasy had been gathered up and transformed into something more beautiful than the original. The same was true for the broken trust, the damaged dignity, and the shattered faith that had littered the streets that summer day. All of it had been gathered up, polished, and transformed into something that would last far longer than any individual life or career or moment of injustice. It had become hope itself, rising from the ashes of despair, with wings spread wide enough to shelter every child who needed protection, every community that demanded respect, and every person who refused to accept that justice was anything less than a fundamental human right. And in the quiet of that anniversary evening, as Derrick drove home through streets that were safer because of his sacrifice, and stronger because of his courage. The spirit of ecstasy seemed to smile in the glow of the dashboard lights, her wings catching the reflection of all the dreams that had been restored, all the lives that had been changed, and all the justice that had finally, irrevocably, triumphantly come home.